Okay, well, welcome to today's session. We are on Advanced Power Platform, ALM with Azure DevOps, and today you'll learn how native integrations between the Power Platform and Azure DevOps allow developers to automate the application lifecycle management of Power Platform. Our speakers today are Dan Cox and Mike Hacker, so thank you guys for bringing this important topic to us. You go to the next slide, Dan. We do aim to provide a digital event today that respects all individuals, so we ask that everyone assist in providing a welcoming and safe environment. We do bring 3 of these events to our customers each month, so with each taking place on Thursdays. If you have a topic that you would like us to consider in our schedule going forward, just drop that in the chat and I'll grab those and bring those to the team for consideration in our schedule. The next one, Dan, we've got chat today for questions. So go ahead and use that. We are going to use that to minimize any potential background noise. We've got folks muted today. Post your questions there. We've got Mike available to answer questions, and we'll also open up the mics at the end if we have time to ask or get your questions answered live as well. And then lastly, you'll receive an email from me tomorrow with the recording and the deck that Dan's using today. And if you don't wish to get those emails from me in the future, just go ahead and reply back and I'll take you off that distribution list going forward. So with that, Dan and Mike, I'm going to hand it over to you guys. Thank you very much for bringing this topic to our customers today, and we appreciate you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Deb. So as Deb mentioned, my name is Dan Cox. I am lucky enough to be joined by a absolutely professional developer on our Azure side with just what can only be considered as the best name for a developer. Mike Hacker is joining us today. So we're going to take you through today with just a couple of things really focused around not only Power Platform, but using Azure DevOps. Before I do, Mike, you want to say a quick hello?
Yeah, just wanted to welcome everybody this afternoon to come and hang out with us for a little bit to learn more about ALM with Power Platform and Azure DevOps. As he said, my name is Mike Hacker. I'm an Azure App Innovation Specialist. I cover our state and local government customers on pretty much the east half of the U.S. Dan's a great guy. He's going to take you through some really interesting stuff here.
All right. And Mike has graciously agreed to join me on this session, and also will be monitoring the chat. So if you do have questions as we're going through this, feel free to type in the chat. Mike, if it's anything that you think is really salient and important, needs to get out there, feel free to chime in anytime. All right. So with that, we're going to dive right in. Now, today is going to be a very packed hour, okay? So we've got a lot to get through with this, but I want to sort of set the stage with you guys, and then we'll jump into the actual demo of what we're going to be building out today. So let me do this. I'm going to start by taking myself off of the camera here, and I'm just going to allow you to focus on the actual content that is in the deck, and then later we'll go through with the slide as well. So what's the first thing, right? Let's just regroup. Now, for those of you who are just joining us today, we have had a series going on, right, that really deals with solution management. And so we're continuing in that same theme. We've gone through and we've looked previously at understanding what solutions are, what solution layering is, how that impacts Power Platform. We've even gotten into some advanced scenarios in terms of doing things like segmentation of your solutions, and even using the built-in pipelines capability that is inside of Power Platform to be able to move those solutions from one environment to another, right? And more and more capability is being built into that, which is really great. But we want to be able to arm those folks who might already be actually using Azure DevOps, because that is absolutely a capability that you can take advantage of today. Now, I will say this, and I cannot say that I speak for Microsoft in this, But for those of you who may not be aware, a few years back, Microsoft acquired a company called GitHub. And chances are that if you are in any way involved in ALM, you have probably heard of GitHub before. Now, I can't say, because I don't have the inside baseball on this, I don't have the knowledge in terms of exactly the direction that we're heading. However, I can say this. In my personal opinion, I'd say it's fairly unlikely that we spent $7.5 billion on GitHub just to put it on the shelf and not consider it. So while I have not had any official word, my assumption would be that you're going to either see us continue to transition to integrating more with GitHub in the future, or you can expect the capabilities that are in Azure DevOps and the capabilities that are in GitHub to converge. Again, so the main focus is for folks who are already using Azure DevOps in terms of being able to handle their backlog and deal with take advantage of the board's capability. They're also using the Git repositories that are behind that. Azure DevOps is still a very capable platform, and for those who want to take advantage of it, that's really what this is intended for. All right. So again, we're not just talking about Power Platform, and we're not just talking about Azure DevOps. We're kind of talking about how the two can be used together to really perform ALM. So as a refresher, what is ALM? Right, that's the real crux here. Well, it is not just code, and it's not just code going into a repository. It is really the union of the people that are involved, right? The general process of actually managing the lifecycle of your application, and also dealing with the continuous delivery of that. So as you can see on the slide, it is much broader than just any particular solution or any particular component. And I apologize, Deb, my slide 7 here, I don't know if that is showing for folks. It's showing as hidden for me, but I did not intend it to be. Are you seeing that?
What is ALM?
Excellent. Okay. So what is ALM, right? There are a lot of pieces to this and a lot of buzzwords that come around. Certainly the sort of deployment is really important to it, as well as source control, right? Those are sort of the two stars of the show. But when you think about it, that management of an application's lifecycle, you talk about having a new application and performing development. You also have to manage legacy applications. And oftentimes you will find that those legacy applications might not even be under source control, right? Now, we're taking advantage of Power Platform. Power Platform has only been out for a few years. And so you're going to find that folks are going to want to be able to take advantage of Azure DevOps or any ALM lifecycle as it comes around to managing those applications. You also hear the term digital transformation thrown around, right? Particularly considering those legacy applications that are out there. And of course, you'll have DevOps and DevSecOps will also come into the vernacular that you'll hear surrounding application lifecycle. But it's not just things like Azure DevOps and GitHub. It's not just the tools, right? There are other considerations that are important to consider when you're talking about ALM, right? Things like application governance. And there are capabilities that are in the platform today that allow you to get more of that application governance. So we've got things like the COE toolkit, like the analytics that are available inside of the platform, lots of capabilities that can help with that. Additionally, there is, of course, sort of the star of the show, which is application development and deployment, right? It's super important to be able to not only develop that application, but also deploy it from what might be a development environment onto a integration environment, a QA environment, any number of environments that might involve integration testing, and then eventually making its way to production. Additionally, as a part of Application Lifecycle Management, you will obviously want to consider software testing. And for anybody who might have attended the Power Platform Community Conference last week, you started to see that software testing is a consideration that is coming into Power Platform as well. Additionally, there's obviously operation maintenance. And so we're just going to focus today really on the deployment side of things, right? So previously we've looked at understanding sort of development in past tech series sessions of actually creating, whether it's a Canvas app, a model-driven app, maybe even a Power Page. And all of those things collapse together into what we refer to as solutions. So there are really, the question becomes what goes into a solution, right? And it is not just one particular thing. So we talked previously about solutions. Again, you've probably heard me mention in the past if you've been on any of our previous sessions. But when I think of a solution, I think of it as a suitcase, right? The solution in and of itself, when it comes to Power Platform, actually has very little functionality, right? What it is really meant to do is encapsulate solution components and allow those to then be managed. And so they might be checked into source control. They might be deployed to other environments, right? These are the things that a solution is sort of responsible for. But when you look at what goes into a solution, as you can see, there are things like schema, right? So when you're creating tables, you're creating columns, the things like the user interface components, right? So if you have multiple forms or you have views, those are all inside of a solution as well. Also, your things like your dashboards, reports, you're going to have in there, even code, right? So when we have a situation where, from a business values perspective, you might really need to get down and dirty and create some plugin code, for example. Perhaps you're calling out to a C# plugin that is going to be performing some logic. That code in and of itself is also contained inside of a solution when you're going to move it from one environment to another. You'll also see things like templates from a security standpoint, right? Security rules, you will often see those packaged inside of solutions. And there are other system settings as well, and even environment variables that would be included. And that spans the platform, right? So for each of those things, it does not matter whether we are talking about Power Automate flows, whether we are talking about Power Apps, whether we're talking about Power Pages. All of these things are all packaged up into this solution, which makes it a great way to transport that logic in sort of one big package from one environment to another. Now, solutions, for those who might recall, they come in two different flavors, right? There are managed solutions and there are unmanaged solutions. Now, when we talked previously, we talked about the fact that unmanaged solutions are typically those solutions that you're only going to want to have in development environments. And the reason why is because when you make a change, that change is made to an unmanaged component, right? So that unmanaged component exists in an unmanaged solution. And when you're ready to then move that to a higher environment, let's say QA or even all the way to production, you would want that to be inside of a managed solution. By having it inside of a managed solution, it is sort of a closed box. And so folks are not going to be able to go in and directly make any changes to a managed solution. Now, if you recall from our previous sessions, you can still make an unmanaged customization layer, and that we talked about in the solution layering session previously. But in terms of maintaining the sanctity of the managed solution itself, yes, once it's in another environment and it's imported as a managed solution, that is whole, right? That does not change. Unmanaged solutions, typically where you're going to be doing your development. So that really comes now that we have the understanding of what concepts are around surrounding solutions, right? What are they contained? What do they contain? How do they come into play, whether they're managed or unmanaged? You start to think about application lifecycle use, right? And how is that going to come into play? What am I going to do with that? Well, here are some examples of ALM pipeline examples, things that you might want to actually produce as a part of your ALM, right? So when you think about a pipeline, you're going to go and you're going to perform some set of tasks. So as you can see here, you might want to create a branch on a source repository. You might want to export that unmanaged solution from your dev environment. You can even unpack it And that is really breaking that unmanaged solution down into its individual parts. And once you have that in its individual parts, you can actually check those into source code, into your source control. You can do things like provisioning a brand new environment, right? Part of the power of this is for those of you who have been around a bit longer than I'd care to admit. I definitely put myself in that category. I can remember what it was like if I wanted a new server. Oh my gosh, the process I would have to go through of trying to get a new one provisioned and ordering it and hoping that it made its way from Dell. And then once it arrived, I had to get a system administrator to install Windows and put all the security patches on it and hopefully eventually install CRM, right? And give me a login. And that whole ceremony, part of the power of the cloud is that is a ceremony that's now broken down into minutes, right? And it's unbelievable how quickly you can do that. And it does not require an individual to actually have to do that anymore, right? Now we can do that as part of a build pipeline task. So you can say, hey, as a part of me performing this pipeline or the pipeline agent performing this pipeline, I want it to provision a new environment for an entirely new cloud environment. I want to deploy all the dependencies along with the solution to that environment. These are all things that can be done in an automated fashion. So tons of capability that is available for you when you think about ALM pipelines. Now, prior to having some of those automated capabilities, how might you handle that? Well, you could manually handle that by doing things like scripting out your own set of tasks that you wanted to perform. Now, there is a thing that is available called the PAC CLI, right? And this is the Power Apps capabilities that allow you to perform a lot of automated tasks and interact with Power Platform. Now, you'll notice over on the right-hand column, you'll see two examples, right? PAC Solution Export, PAC Solution Import. If you were to install the PAC CLI, you will notice that there are tons of little commands that you can run to manage your environment. And there are lots of different things that you can do, all from within just running a command line interface. That allows you to automate a lot of that. And we are building upon that, right? Now, you could go through and you could manually script these. Certainly that is a possibility, but then the onus is on you to run them. It's a bit more entailed for you to have to see what the impact was, see what the outcomes were, take it from step to step. We're going to do that, but we're going to do that inside of Azure DevOps, right? Because we want to be able to take advantage of all the features that it has. So that's where Azure DevOps comes in to integrate with Power Platform, right? Now, what does that really look like? There are a couple of key concepts when it comes to understanding DevOps, particularly around the pipelines capability, right? So when you think about it, you start off really with a trigger, and that trigger is what is telling that pipeline to run. Then from there, you get a pipeline, and that pipeline is made up of one or more stages, and that pipeline can deploy to one or more environments. Now, within each stage, a stage is really a way of organizing those jobs in a pipeline, and each stage can have one or more jobs. Each job actually runs on one agent. Now, a job can also be agentless, but what is an agent? Well, an agent is really a computing infrastructure with installed agent software that runs one job at a time, right? So each agent runs a job, and that job contains one or more steps. Now, a step can be a task or it can be a script, and it's sort of the smallest building block of a pipeline. Whereas a task is a prepackaged script that performs an action. Think about things like publishing a build artifact or importing a Power Platform solution. Now, you may be asking, what is an artifact? Well, an artifact is a collection of files or packages, and that is what gets published by a run of this pipeline. So I'm going to take a quick check for hands. If anybody just really loves more PowerPoint slides, please feel free to raise your hand. This is usually a pretty low population, but I think it's about time we let the rubber hit the proverbial road. Deb, I see your hand up. You are definitely better at PowerPoint than I am, so I'm going to leave the PowerPoints to you. All right, so with that, let me take a second and I'm actually going to share out my screen and we'll dig right in. So somebody give me a thumbs up when you're able to see my screen. All right, thank you, Deb. Okay, so let's take a look and sort of dive in on what we're looking at. Right? There is a lot to go on here, and we're going to try to make our way through this as quickly, but also as easily consumable as possible. So you can see here I'm looking at the Power Platform Admin Center, right? And if I click here to my list of environments, it's going to pull up all the environments that exist in this particular tenant. Now you can see in particular, I have one that's been labeled Devo1, that's going to be my dev environment. And I also have an INTO1 as my integration environment. In this particular case, we're really going to show this, but the concepts are the same even if you had a prod environment in the mix as well. So I've got these two environments. I know that in the Devo1, that's where I'm doing all of my development. So I'm actually going to just open up this tab here. Now you can see I'm going to change over to my Devo1 environment here in my environment selector. And it's going to go through and show me what solutions I have. Now there's a ton in here, so I'm going to click over to unmanaged. And you'll see that I have a text series solution. Now, we've actually gone through in the past and actually gone through what it looks like to create a solution, add solution components. So I'm not going to bore you with that. I'm going to keep it very simple and just say for this particular solution, all I have is one table that contains the episodes for the text series.
Hey, Dan, I don't want to disrupt you right now, but could you zoom in just a little bit on that because the screen is a little small on the screen, on the sharing screen.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.
How's that?
That's much better. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for telling me that because being on the presenter side of things, I would not have seen that. So I appreciate it. All right. So we've got these two environments. In the dev environment, you can see that I do have this text series solution. If I switch over to my INT, my integration environment, and I take a look at the solutions there, and I look at unmanaged, I just have the two default solutions. If I look at managed, again, quote unquote, nothing up my sleeve. Now, I am going to try something today, and if I, fail in a fiery crash, then I will take that on the chin as I should have known better. However, we're going to go through and we're actually going to try to build this live. Now, some of the pieces I've actually gone through and created, so we'll just be looking at those for the sake of time. However, as you can see, I don't have any solution here in my integration environment. And I really just want to be able to deploy that along with a couple other steps. So here is where Azure sort of comes into play, right? Now, what I need before I can perform any of these steps is I really need an app registration, right? So what I can do is I can go here to my Azure portal, and I'll just go to the home here. And you'll see I've got app registrations here. So I'm going to click on app registrations. And I can choose to create a new registration here. So if I click on new registration, that's actually going to allow me to provide a name. Now I have some previously created app registrations in here, so I won't actually go through the process of typing it out. But you can expect that if I were to create my registration, then I can go through and give it a name. And in that, I can decide exactly what scope I want to have for this particular application. So I can decide that I only want it to be within my tenant, or you can see the other options here, even as far as doing personal Microsoft accounts as well. Now, if I just go and click register, it's going to create my registration. And that registration is really what is going to allow this application to sort of act as a user in the Power Platform. There's a couple other things that I'm going to need to do in order to actually make this succeed. Now, first and foremost, we always take a security first approach. And the important thing is that we're going to be able to interact with this app registration, but only if we have a secret set up, right? So I can come here and I can choose to click on new client secret. And if I do, I can give it a description, and I will just call this my secret. And you'll see that we have the ability to define when this client secret is going to expire. Now that's really nice, right? Because not only can I choose the recommended 180 days, but if I hit the drop down here, I can choose things like 3 months, 12 months, even as far up as 24 months. And if I need to, I could even do a custom. So as an example, if I wanted this to come into play starting today, and I only wanted it to be good until Monday, that's no problem, right? I can absolutely do that. So if I click add here, it's going to go through and it's going to create my secret. Now you'll notice a couple of things here. It's added it to the list, but it's also got a little flag here letting me know, hey, this is going to expire pretty soon. So you might want to consider that because you might have some integration that is using this. And if this key expires and they're using that secret, that's going to be a problem. Now you'll notice here that I've got the secret ID. That's a GUID. And then I've also got the value for this. Now I will say that when you create a secret, very important that you copy off the value of this secret, because the next time that you come back to this screen, this is going to be obfuscated and you won't be able to actually get to the secret. The only way to deal with that is to create a new secret. So definitely you want to make a copy of that value so that you can use it later. And we do have a handy little icon here so you can copy it to your clipboard. Now there is one other thing that I'm going to need to do while I'm in here, and that's really going to be setting up the API permissions. So what does this mean, right? So this is giving my app registration permissions to perform certain tasks. And there's all sorts of tasks that you can give to a particular app registration. So if I click here, you'll notice already that I've already got the ability to read my profile off of the Microsoft Graph. Now, if I hit add permission, there are tons of these permissions that are available. So as you can see here, Microsoft Graph is right off the top. We've also got things like DevOps and Azure Rights Management, Power Automate, SharePoint, right? The list goes on and on. In our particular case, we're going to look at the Dynamics CRM permission. So I'm going to click on that. And when you look inside of here, I've got the ability to choose what permissions I want. And in particular, I do want to be able to impersonate an organization user. So I'm going to choose to add that permission to the list of permissions that should be allowed for this app registration. Now, when I click on add permission, you can see I get the little toast notification that it's adding it. And now you can see I've got this user impersonation set up as a delegated permission. Now, it may not be super obvious, but you can see that right here, you can decide whether or not admin consent is required. In my particular case, I am going to go ahead and grant admin consent. Now, I would highly encourage you to work with your security folks, right? We talk about the concept of fusion development, and it is to get everyone involved, right? We want everybody to be on the same page. So make sure that your Azure admins are giving you the blessing for this. Now, if at some point I needed to revoke that permission, I could obviously come here and I could choose to remove that permission, or I could revoke the admin consent from that as well. So within Azure itself, plenty of capabilities that you can really manage all of these services. Before I continue, Mike, anything you want to chime in here or any questions in the chat that you want to surface?
No, I think we're doing pretty good in chat. I think this is the key, though, right? Is just remembering that this registration is really providing that access into the platform and unlocking some of those security permissions that you're going to need to be able to do these deployments, basically.
Absolutely. Yep. Great point. So now that I have this app registration, that is sort of my starting point with this, right? But I need to do something with this, right? Now I have this app registration, but I'm not really taking advantage of it anywhere. And since this session is meant to both deal with Azure DevOps as well as Power Platform, we want to take advantage of this app registration. So if I go back into my environments here, you'll notice that I have both an integration environment and a dev environment. Now, in my particular case, I've already created two other registrations, one for my dev environment and one for my integration environment. And the way that you would actually take advantage of that is that needs to exist as a user. So if I click here into my dev one, you'll see that I'm taken to the sort of home page for my environment. And I'm going to click up on settings here. Now this settings has lots of different ways that you can manage this given environment, but in particular, we're interested in this users and permissions section. Now, you may notice that it's got things like business units, security profiles, plugins, security roles, right? Lots of things around security. And it's also got a users down here. Now, when you see this users, what you should be thinking of is an actual person, an actual user, right? What we're talking about here is an application user. So we're going to click on application user up here at the top. And you'll notice that it comes up with a list here. Now, I already created this one. This is my DevOps for pipelines. If you wanted to create one, you can just hit new app user, and you'll notice that there's already a convenient add an app button. And it's going to pull up all of the apps that I have. And here is the my registration that I created. So I could choose that my registration. I could select what business unit I want it to go into, and I only have the one, so I'm going to choose that. But remember, we're creating a user, and a user has to have permissions, right? We're not allowing a user to do anything more than the permissions that they have been assigned. And those permissions are assigned one of two ways, either by way of a security role being directly assigned to that user, or by that user being a member of a team and it then inherits the security roles that are assigned to that team. So I can come here and look at my security roles, and I do have a bunch of them. But if I scroll down, in my particular case, I could, for the sake of the demo and speed, I could just come down here and actually give it the system administrator role, right? So I could choose that. I could hit save, and that would then create my user. Now you see the app is listed as my registration. And if I hit create, it is going to go in and it's going to create a new user. And that would then show up in my list here. But there is one sort of important difference to note here. Because this is an application user, by default, it is actually going to take the name of the registration, the app that was used, and it's actually going to preface it with a pound symbol. And that is to let you know that that is actually an application that you've registered. Now, this will take a minute because it's got to go through and actually create the user. It's got to assign the security roles, all the same typical thing that you would do for any particular user. Now, if I click back in here, you can see that I've actually got the name of my user. I've got the app name from Entra, and it's given it an app ID. It's in an active state, and there's security roles. You can see I've got the system administrator role, and I could still go in here and edit the security roles if I needed to. It's a custom app, and I've assigned the business unit. And just like every other user, it's assigned an email address for me. Everything looks good there, but in our particular case, I'm going to use this one that I've already created called DevOps for Pipelines. Now, again, I want to be clear. This is very specific to this Devo 1 environment. Just because that app registration has registration here, that does not mean anything to my integration environment. And that's really important because from a security standpoint, I'm now lowering my attack surface and I'm making it very context specific so that one app is performing one particular task. So let's go and look at my integration environment. If I come in here and I look at my users and permissions and I look at application users, you can see again, I don't have one for my registration but I do have the other app registration that I had previously created. So I had created an app called INT01 AppReg. It had given it an ID. You can see it also has System Administrator, but this is related to an entirely different app registration. So I've limited down what that app registration can access within the platform. Very important from a deployment standpoint. All right. So now let's take a quick step and look back at what we've done. We've created two app registrations, one for my dev environment, one for my integration environment. In both of those, I have both assigned a secret for them, and I've also added the user impersonation permission. Finally, I've added those to my different environments. So I'm really ready to go from the Power Platform side. Now let's start to dig in on what we're going to do with Azure DevOps. So I'm going to click here on my DevOps tab, and you're going to notice that I've actually already created an environment. I've entitled it SLG Tech Series, and I've given it a project here called Power Platform Tech Series. Now, if I click into this, we can go through and we can actually look at what this contains. And there are a number of pieces to DevOps, and the intention here is not to go over every capability in DevOps because we'll be here for days. All right, so you can do things like creating dashboards, you can create wikis, you can create boards that allow you to track things like work items, associate them to sprints, so on and so forth. But I've also got repos here. We will look at that shortly. I've also got pipelines, and that's, of course, part of what we're here for. And there are other capabilities like test plans and artifacts. So if I go through and I actually look at my repo, I've actually got it pulled up here. And I'm going to refresh this, right? Nothing up my sleeve. The only contents inside of this repo are just a couple of YAML files for the pipelines that I created and a README file, which is then shown here. So now we want to be able to start to take advantage of some of the capabilities that Power Platform has within Azure DevOps. Now, a couple of things that I want to take you through. Number one, there is, for those of you who haven't already seen, there is a marketplace, right? And you can get there by clicking on this little shopping bag icon here that if you mouse over says marketplace. So if I click there, I have two options. I can either manage the extensions that I have, or I can browse the marketplace. I'm going to choose Browse Marketplace, and it's going to take me into the Visual Studio Marketplace. And as you can see, it's already looking at extensions for Azure DevOps. Now, there are a bunch of them, so you can certainly go through it and browse at your leisure for all of the different extensions that are available. But in particular, the one we're looking for is Power Platform. So if I search for Power Platform, the very first result generally that you'll get here is the one that's from us, and we've got the blue check to verify, and that is the Power Platform Build Tools. So I'm going to click on that, and as you can see here, there's a nice little Get It Free button. Now, I already have this installed in my environment, but as you can see, it gives me an overview of what the Power Platform Build Tools are, and I can go through and I can actually browse through the previous release notes on this as well. If you're good with it and you'd like to install that into your environment, you can just click on Get It Free. I promise you that it is worth every penny you will spend on it and more because it's free. And when you get here, you've got a couple different options. Now, for folks who still are using Azure DevOps Server and the on-premise, you can certainly download that package, but you can also choose which organization you want to install it into. Now, you'll notice that it's got SLG Tech Series selected, and you'll also notice that's letting me know, hey, this is already installed, you're all set. If that was not the case, now I don't have any other organizations here, but if that was not the case, then there would just be an install button and you'd be able to add that to your organization. Okay. So for now, I'm just going to go back to the Azure DevOps main site here. So that particular piece is going to be really important because as we build out the pipelines, in this particular case, we're building them for the sake of getting Power Platform capabilities, right? So a couple other things that we want to cover here. So for starters, I'm going to come down here to the bottom and I'm going to click on Project Settings. There's a couple of different things that we need to set up here. First and foremost is you're going to need to choose an agent pool. Now, what is an agent pool? We talked about this previously, but when you have these agents that are actually running these different tasks, you can decide where those are sourced from. Now, in my particular case, I'm going to show you that not only can you actually use resources like virtual machines that exist in Azure, but if you wanted to, I actually created one here called My Pool. And if I look at that, you can see that it's got jobs that are running. If I go into the agents, you're going to see one agent that is inside of this pool. And this is actually my laptop, right? This is the laptop that I am presenting from, and this is acting as an agent. So you have the ability, when you click on New Agent here, you can actually download the agent itself. And if you download that agent, it's going to give you some directions on how to create the agent. Then you'll configure the agent, and then you can run the agent. Now I have one running right here in my PowerShell, right? You can see that I've gone through and I've been testing, and some jobs have been failed, some have succeeded, some have canceled. This is going to listen to the jobs list that is inside of Azure DevOps Pipelines. And when it sees that there is one for which it is an agent of that pool, it's going to pick up that job and it's going to run it. So I've gone through the sort of setup here of actually setting up the agent itself. One of the things I will point out for anybody who's going to try this is when you run the configure command, it's going to ask you for permissions to do that. And one of the things that you're going to need is a personal access token. Now, the way that you can do that is I'm signed in, and if I click up on this user settings icon, you'll see that there's a personal access tokens list here. So if I click on that, you can see that I've already created one token. Now you can certainly create a new one. And if you do, same thing, you'll just give it a name, you'll specify what organization it's for, and you're going to give it an expiration, right? Because you don't want those tokens just sitting out there forever. So best practice is to make sure that you definitely have a near-term expiration. You can also define what scopes are a part of that token. Now, for the sake of the demo, you'll notice that I gave it full access, but you can certainly define at a very granular level exactly what access this personal access token should have. So I'm using my agent token, and that's the one that it asked me for when I set up the agent. So now that I've got the agent set up, I'm in a good state there. Let me go back over here to my settings, and I'm just going to back out of my personal access tokens. Now we looked at pools. We saw that we have an agent set up. There's a couple other settings that we're going to want to set up. So here in the settings, you have a couple of capabilities. And one of the things that you'll notice, now I have this disabled at the organization level, right? There's two different levels to Azure DevOps. There's the organization and there's the project. I have this disabled at the organization level, so I can't change it at the project level, but I have done this to disable the classic build. There's two different ways to build a pipeline. It is either using the classic build interface or using the YAML build interface. And we're actually going to look at building it out with YAML. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, YAML, depending on who you ask, either stands for yet another markup language, or that YAML isn't YAML. We're going to use YAML to set this up, so we will take a look at that. There's one other piece that we want to look at in the settings area here, and that is this service connections. Now I have created two different service connections. Forget about these two with the cloud, but you'll see that I have this one called Power Platform connection, and that was the one that I created for my dev environment. So you can see that I've got this using an application ID and secret. And the same thing is going to exist for my integration environment. If I want to create a new service connection, you see that there's lots of different connections that you can have. And in particular, we're looking at the Power Platform one. If I click next here, you've got a couple of different authentication methods. In my particular case, I did use the application ID and client secret that came from that registration. So I'm going to need to point it at the server URL, and you can always get that here. So when you're in the environments, if I go to INT01, for example, the environment URL is right here. So you can copy this environment URL, and you can drop it in here. Now, you do need to start off with an HTTP or HTTPS. In the case of Power Platform, it's always going to be HTTPS. You're going to want to drop in your tenant ID, your application ID, the client secret for it, and then you can give it a name. Optionally, you can also put in a service management reference, or you can add a description as well. And for a security standpoint, for the demo, have chosen to grant access permission to all pipelines. Now that I have that service connection, I also am going to need one other thing, and that's a repository. Now I've got this repo already existing, but it's not going to be enough for me just to have the repo. Again, I need to allow my service as a part of that build to actually get at the repository. So if I come here into the repository settings, I can choose the repository that I'm looking at, which is our PP Tech series. I'm going to look over here on the security tab. Now it's pulled up all of the users and groups that are in my particular organization here. And you'll notice that the list is not very large, but there's two that I want to point out. One is the project collection build service accounts. You're going to want to go in here, and by default, these are all going to say not set, right? But you're going to want to give it contribute access, because we're going to export a solution and we're going to push that into source control. And same thing for the build service user here. I'm also going to specifically and explicitly allow contribute access for that. So that's what's going to allow those users to actually contribute to my Git repository. All right, enough about settings, enough of the formality with the sort of setup. Let's actually dig in. So I'm going to come into my left rail here, and I'm going to choose pipelines. Now you can see I've got two different pipelines set up. If you go to choose a new pipeline, what you're going to be presented with is just this wizard that's going to ask you, where do you want to get your code from? Now, I'm starting from Azure Repos Git, and that is going to be the repository here that I just made. So if I choose that, it's going to say, well, which repository you want, because you can have multiple. In this case, I only have one set up, so I'm going to choose that. And I can actually just choose a starter pipeline. Now you'll see that this is YAML. We are in the pro code section of our text series, so hopefully nobody is instantly scared away with this. But for anybody who is already acclimated to JSON, just know that this is very similar, except obviously there's not as many curly braces. But instead, YAML depends on indentation. So as you can see, I've got a pool here, and the VM image is a property of the pool, and it's tabbed in, it's indented in to let me know that that is a property of this particular piece. So you can see that there are properties. If I were to come in here and edit this YAML, I hit enter, I do get IntelliSense, so I can choose either the demands or name. If I wanted to give it a name, I could certainly do that. I could even reference my pool, for example. Now, I'm not going to take you through step by step for the sake of time, but let's just go back and actually look at one of the pipelines that I built. Now, I've got two in my case. So I'm actually going to choose the export solution, and I'm going to choose to edit it. Now, the export solution is the bigger of the two, right? What is this going to do? Well, as you can see, I've specified no trigger here because I don't want this to trigger just any time, but you can actually have this trigger even off of a change on a particular branch in the repository if you wanted to. I've got to specify the pool, and you'll notice that it's named my pool, and that is that pool that I'm running locally. So I'm specifying which pool it should be assigned to. And then here I've just got a series of tasks, right? So please don't be intimidated when you see this. It is really just breaking down the individual tasks that I need to run. Now, the helper here allows you, you'll see there's a little button here to hide or show the assistant. The assistant is super helpful. So as I've got a task here, this one already exists. If I wanted to create a new one, I could scroll to the bottom here and I could search my tasks. So let's say I wanted to use the Power Platform, and let's say I wanted to take advantage of any of these actions, right? I can do that very simply. And if I were to click, let's say, backup environment, it gives me a wizard style helper, and I can decide how I want to connect. I'm going to choose service principal with client secret. And when I do, it's going to ask me which one I wanted to use, right? Now, these are the connectors that we used before. So I can choose my connection. I can specify a URL, though if I don't specify one, it's actually going to get it from the connection itself. And you can see in the case, since we're backing up an environment, it's asking me for a label of that backup. I'll just give it that, and it's going to grab the build number from the system settings. And if I hit add here, you can see that it's highlighted in here the YAML that it's created that represents that particular task in my pipeline. So it's saying, yep, I am going to go to, I'm going to use this connection, the Power Platform connection, and I'm going to back up because no environment was specified. I'm going to use the environment that this one is connected to, and I'm going to label it as full backup. Now, if you don't want that, I can just hit backspace and get rid of it all. Additionally, since I've got all these tasks already set up, we can just look at them one by one. So here, the first task I've got is this Power Platform tool installer. And you'll notice in the YAML that I can actually click on the settings link here. And over here on the right-hand side, all of those settings that pertain to that task pop back up in a much easier to interact with interface. Now, the one thing that you always want to start with is the Power Platform Tools installer. Anytime that you're running a Power Platform tools, you need to have those installed. So this is the step that is going to tell that agent, hey, I want you to take advantage of the Power Platform tools. So install those first. Then the second step that I have here is a Who Am I step. Now, if I click on settings, you'll see that it's actually labeled as a Power Platform Who Am I? And that step is very valuable because it's actually going to test out my authentication, right? If I want to make sure that I can actually get a good connection to a particular environment, this Who Am I really helps me to be able to do that. And so I'm just going to test out using the environment URI that was specified. And that way, when I get to the next steps, I'm only going to get there if this task passed. Now from there, I'm doing a couple of things here. So you'll notice this first task, and again, don't get lost in all of the properties and values of the syntax of YAML here. It's oftentimes better just to click settings, and you can see those settings built out here. So what is this doing? Well, this is going to export a solution from my environment. Now I've got to give it a name, and you'll see that it actually has a variable set up here. Now, where is it getting that from? Well, if I click variables up here, you can see that I can specify a solution name, and I've given it a default of text series, which if you remember when we looked back, we actually saw that there was a text series solution in my dev environment, but not in my integration environment. So I've just got that defaulted to text series. If I don't provide a name as a part of the run of this pipeline, it's going to inject that for me. And then it's going to ask, where do you want that to be outputted to, the solution file? Now, I do have this special artifact staging directory, and that's going to be available for me as a part of that pipeline process. And you'll see from there, I'm just using the backslash to indicate that I want it to be in that directory. And I'm going to give it the same name as my solution name, except I'm exporting this as an unmanaged solution. So if I continue to scroll to the right, you'll notice that I put underscore unmanaged.zip here. And in the export as managed solution, I have that unchecked. So this is actually going to reach out to my environment. It's going to export that solution, and it's going to save the file that that export produces on my agent. Now, once I have that, there's another step that I can perform on that, which is the Power Platform checker. That is actually the Power Platform solution checker, and it will validate your solution. Now, there's tons of different rules that get applied to this, but very important because as a part of your application lifecycle management, you want to be able to check that solution. You may not want that to go forward unless it passes this solution checker checks. Now from there, again, I have downloaded this solution. I've got the file. I have just run it through the Power Platform Solution Checker, and we're going to assume that that passed. So now I'm going to go on to the next task, and this is the unpack solution. So what is that going to do? Well, that is going to take some input file, and you'll notice that it is actually pointed at the exact same file that came out of this export solution. And it's going to unpack this. Now, remember, I told you a solution is just like a suitcase, and the verbiage here is not dissimilar. We are actually unpacking that suitcase. So we're taking all of the components of that solution, and we're going to unpack those down into their individual parts. So now I can take that actual output and I can commit that to source control. Now, before I do, I'm also going to do another export here. I've exported the unmanaged solution here because I wanted to run it through the solution checker and I wanted to unpack that solution before I continued. But I also want to grab a version of the solution as managed. I can click settings here and you can see that I've got export as managed solution checked. And that actually translated to this little bit of YAML here, just a managed : true. So as you get more and more comfortable with it, it gets pretty easy to navigate. Now, all of these things have been downloaded, but I want other steps to be able to take advantage of these files. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to publish these as build artifacts. And you can see that it's asking me for a path to publish. I'll click on settings so that you can see that here as well. So I can decide where I want that to be published to. And then finally, I'm going to do one other task in this pipeline, which is run some PowerShell. So remember, further up in the pipeline, I've got my unpacked solution. Now I can actually run a script that is going to change to my sources directory, right? Which is, if you notice up in the unpacked solution, the target folder was the sources directory. I'm going to change directory into that. I'm going to run a few git commands, which are going to add those files to my Git repository, and then I'm going to push those up into my repo. So let's give that a shot and actually see how that runs. You can see that I can choose what branch I want to go off of. I'm going to let that run. Now, right off the bat, you can see that I'm here, and I'm going to come in here to the job. Now, I'm already getting feedback here that I want this to run. And all I need to do is wait for my job tool to pick it up and start running. If I bring this over, you can see that it's already told me that it started to run this. And now as I go back to the interface on DevOps, I can get some detailed information on exactly what this job is doing. So if I come here, you can see the first step, it's automatically going to check out the repo for me. I'm going to go into the Power Platform installer, and you can see that it's gone through and it's actually installed that Power Platform installer for me. And it's just going to go through each task and handle them and give me a notification of exactly what happens to let me know that everything runs. And as it gets through, you'll see that I can actually get some detailed feedback on exactly how that ran. So if I come back into the Who Am I, you can see that it's actually grabbing my universal profile and it's testing and everything looks good. And it's going to eventually clear out the authentication of profiles and remove the token cache. Now it's moving on to my export solution. So step by step, you get feedback on exactly how this is running. And we're just going to let that go through and run. It's going to take a few minutes. And what you're going to find is when it gets down to my PowerShell, I'm actually going to be able to come here and refresh this. Now it's not done yet, so you don't see anything yet. But when that gets complete, it's actually going to take the unpacked solution and it's going to commit it to my source control. So now you have a situation where all of that is automatically added to your source control, and you have some good control over that. Now, there are lots of steps that you can add into your pipelines. So if you wanted to do things like run flows or interact with some other systems, very similar to the way that you would use Power Automate, you can actually assign lots of different tasks to sort of build these out. So we're going to let that continue to run. In the meantime, I'm actually going to go back to the pipelines here, and I'm just going to show you the solution deployment. So I'm going to go in the solution deployment, and I'm going to edit this. Now, very similar to what we were previously looking at, right? I've just got a manual trigger. I am using the same pool to get it done. And again, lead-in step, I'm going to use the Power Platform Tools installer. I'm going to do the Who Am I to verify that my authentication is working. And then I'm going to download those artifacts. Now, remember previously in the solution, the pipeline that's currently running, I packaged all those up. So the managed and the unmanaged solutions are packaged up and deployed and published as build artifacts. I can go and grab those from that build, from that pipeline run, and then I can actually import the managed solution, which you can see spelled out right here, from those artifacts. And this is going to point at my INT01 environment. And when that completes and has run, you're going to actually be able to go in here into your solution list. Now, right now I don't have anything here, but once this ran, you're going to see that the solution is actually going to be put in place. So with that, I realize that we're a little bit past time. I appreciate everybody's patience. I'm going to let this continue to run, and let's see if we can field any Q&A.
Fantastic. I will go ahead and unmute the lines for anyone who can hang on here and get their questions answered. Also, I put a link in the chat to get some feedback from today's session. So if you could go ahead and give us that, that would be great. And okay, Mike should be able to come off mic or mute now and ask a question.